I'm Jonathan Schabowski, Field CTO at Solace. And so I'm excited to talk to you all today about event-driven integration and the capabilities that you need in order to enable a real-time business. So ultimately, I think we all feel that this struggle that, we live in a world of more. And what we mean by that is, there's more applications popping up every day within the enterprise. They're more distributed, more organizations are adapting, and adopting a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud deployment approach. Data sharing is increasingly up every year. Of course, a lot of that data doesn't get reused, and we'll talk about that. And ultimately, people need instant gratification. They need data more quickly to make decisions, and really latency expectations are now down into mere seconds or even sub-seconds in order to make an impact on your customer. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the need for more intelligence with AI, agentic AI, and all of that good stuff. And so ultimately, all five of these things are making it more difficult to connect and integrate everything. So to that end, it's even more complicated than that. If you look at your existing enterprise stack of applications and integration tools, API management tools, all of these things sort of come together into a perfect storm of point-to-point siloed integrations. A lot of us have been, really adopted API-led integration type of approaches where, yes, APIs are available for a lot of these things, but in order to get access to real-time data, you're stuck really doing batch and polling type of exercises, which really isn't real time. And so to that end, traditional integration really hasn't been enough. iPaaS have worked, but really what we see a lot of is, as I mentioned before, systems are polling for changes, and indirectly that's causing a lot of tight coupling to exist between the different APIs and the clients. And in fact, a common approach is to orchestrate the API invocation calls in order to provide something of higher value. So in this case, maybe you've got some sort of a Salesforce adapter that's going to pull a whole bunch of different downstream systems, maybe SAP, ServiceNow, Workday, et cetera. And these calls are sort of chained in a one after another sort of fashion, which really is not a very efficient way in order to get the data that you need in real time. It's really meaning that you're going to struggle with scalability as any of these services get overloaded. And really the performance of this is only as good as the slowest downstream service. And so really our approach is to say is that, point-to-point integrations are great for a lot of cases, but if all of your interactions are synchronous, it really increases your overall complexity. It hampers your ability to react in real time to different events and changes to your business. And you can have really nasty cascading failures that can affect your overall operational status. And one fun fact that I found recently was that Salesforce reported that 98.5% of all API polling calls actually don't return any new information. If we think about that from an overall downstream impact perspective, one is the system polling for changes is getting the same data 98.5% of the time. That's a waste. But magnify that on the service provider that really, if they're doing all of these calculations and database lookups only to provide you the same information again, and sure, maybe it's cached, but do that amongst all of the different API clients that are all searching and striving for real-time business impact data. Really, that's a lot of load and performance impacts and costs that you really don't need to have. And so Solace's approach is to really think about integration differently, because ultimately businesses just consist of events. And what do we mean by that? So take any business, let's say it's just some retail outlet that, online a customer's placing an order. Well, really, any of these different events can be consumed by any number of different processes that really need to know when a customer places an order. Think about the impact on maybe a loyalty system when a customer places an order, payment systems, logistics systems, et cetera. And in fact, as we mentioned, any sort of action that exists within a business can really be defined as an event. A supplier updating an inventory, a passenger scanning a boarding pass, even a sensor detecting a temperature change in a shipping container. All of these different things can be defined as an event. And so ultimately, each event can be described by a noun, which is really just a thing, in this case, a shipping container, as I just mentioned, and a verb of what happened to that thing, a change of temperature. But specifically, you can also add properties that further describe, maybe the location of the shipping container, maybe the owner of the shipping container, et cetera, so that downstream consumers can get access to just the data filtered in the way that they need. So to summarize that, really all of this is an event is equal to a noun and a verb plus a set of properties. Might sound a little bit strange, but really that is a very, very important theme that you'll hear throughout this presentation. And in fact, I like to joke that E equals NVP, not MVP, but NVP. And in fact, E doesn't equal MC squared anymore. Like the theory of relativity, we really want to think more about the theory of event centricity. So to that end, really, as I mentioned before, everything that occurs in the world is an event. And in fact, using the same sort of practice of a noun, a verb, and a set of properties, you can define that in any language that you could possibly imagine. So if you're not a native English speaker, hopefully you've seen me encapsulate one of your languages here that you speak. And so the key is just, it really it translates across the world to any sort of an industry. All right, so grounding ourselves back in reality here with application architecture, what I've described here is that all applications sort of have business processes baked in. You're storing state in data stores, and these application business processes are really exposing their capability through a set of UIs and APIs that ultimately can be used by internal systems, other SaaS applications, or partner systems. Pretty simple, right? Well, what we're really talking about is the thought of what if you had an event-driven integration platform that allows you to stream events, filter events, and integrate those events anywhere? How would we do that? Well, what we would do first is we would start to liberate data out of your existing application and business processes by defining the different events. And the key here is that the integration point to pulling these events out doesn't require the rewriting of your application business processes we'll see forward. We're kind of like surgeons, and we try to find the smallest incision possible in your application business process in order to unlock, unleash, and ultimately liberate that real-time data that has value. So in this case, using some examples, maybe it's a ship that's docked, and the shipping company in the name. Maybe it's something near and dear to my heart, like ordering beer, or maybe it's just an employee has been hired. All of that data can be published and liberated into the event-driven integration platform, where then in real time, these other types of systems can then subscribe and ultimately integrate with that real-time data. But it goes really beyond just that. What if you want to integrate with Gen AI as a great example? I was just talking recently to a client, and they were really talking about how differentiating it was to have a set of real-time data at their disposal for their Gen AI systems to act upon, because obviously real-time context is really vital for AI systems. Or what about, providing this data in real time to analytics systems? Maybe you have Kafka and you're using Kafka and other analytics tools hanging off of that. That's great. The key is that this event-driven integration platform is really the heart of how all of this data gets moved across your enterprise landscape. So what we really need to do is start to talk about and think about turning integration inside out. And so what we mean by turning integration inside out is, if you look at this diagram here, you can again see sort of this spaghetti model of integration, which has really been the way that, we've all integrated over the last 20 years, a bunch of synchronous calls, probably a lot of polling, and really a lot of this has been done in a very centralized way. And so the future, we think, really looks like this, where events and real-time data streams are really the heart of the enterprise, and where you're doing integration as close to the edge as possible. And the benefit of doing integration as close to the edge as possible is it both is going to provide a better performance characteristic for these different services. You're going to be able to integrate in a simple, seamless sort of way, where things, instead of being tightly orchestrated, are more choreographed together. And ultimately, it's really going to decouple your producers and consumers of your different pieces of data within the enterprise. And so to that end, we can use event-driven integration to really liberate your data with events, capture these changes as they happen with what we call micro integrations. And micro integrations is not really a technology as much as it is a pattern in which you can do integration. And finally, democratize your data by making it discoverable and accessible via an API. Very similar to the way that API management has done this with developer portals. And so if we look at this diagram here, what you can sort of see is, really a reimagined enterprise where you're still using your existing iPaaS and RESTful mechanisms with APIs in order to do ad hoc queries and commands, and all of that's still backed with Open API from an exposure and discovery perspective. But as these different commands are happening, for these different applications in the business, an event mesh is added where now real-time events are emitted by these different systems. Real-time events are consumed by these systems. All of these interactions can be defined by async API, and third parties, such as SAP or Instacart or Salesforce, et cetera, could all leverage the company's API portal or developer portal and see all of the different synchronous and asynchronous event-driven APIs all in one place. And so really, this causes a set of business benefits to really occur, such as innovation really increasing because people can just tune into exactly the information that they need. The information is significantly more timely than polling. And businesses are able to quickly respond to customer changes, Black Friday events, et cetera. And so Solace has created an event-driven approach to integration that's really threefold. And these steps are very, very important. And we would claim you need all of these capabilities in order to successfully do event-driven integration today. So the first step is liberate and integrate. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin. But one is, how do you liberate data from existing systems, whether they're existing systems that are custom to your enterprise or different software as a service type of applications like Salesforce. And sure, maybe with Salesforce, you do a majority of your integration with something like MuleSoft. And so you could grab events via MuleSoft out of Salesforce and liberate them into your platform. The other side of the coin, like I mentioned, would be integrate. Well, maybe you need to bring data into SAP and you use Integration Suite for that. Maybe you need to pull data into ServiceNow or Workday. And so really liberate and integrate is sort of the two sides of how you integrate your end systems with real-time data. In between that is really the beauty of what you're searching for in your integration platform as well, which is how you stream this data across the enterprise, regardless of cloud provider, and ultimately filter the data to just what the downstream consumers need. And ideally, that filtering needs to be done in a very simple way so that you're not wasting resources just customizing for each end customer. And finally, you need to democratize it by providing self-service access, discovery, and governance so that architects, developers, and stakeholders across the business know what types of event streams are available so that they can ultimately build the integrations that we just talked about. Because if you obviously don't know that it exists, you're not going to reuse it and you're not going to build it. So let's jump into each step and really explain how you would perform this strategy for integration. So first is to adopt micro integrations as an architecture. And so what that again means is really allowing you to liberate and integrate through events. So in this example, as I continued here, really there's three different ways you could implement micro integrations. Because again, micro integrations is really an architectural pattern. And what it really has to be is small, single, and purpose and decentralized. And so in this case, there's really two types of micro integrations. There's source micro integrations that pull data and liberate data out of existing systems, and target micro integrations that really feed real-time data to existing systems. And so this all can be basically done through a variety of different mechanisms. One is by leveraging your existing iPaaS solutions, like I mentioned, with SAP Integration Suite, Boomi, or MuleSoft. Another way to do it, like I showed with the ServiceNow integration, is by using Solace's PubSub Plus micro integration framework. And what that framework allows you to do is, in a very low-code, easy way, create source or target micro integrations that then are ultimately deployed and run as a service for you within Solace Cloud. And then the third mechanism would be is to really leverage the integration platforms, open standards, whether that's JMS or AMQP or MQTT, one of these native event-driven protocols, or even using HTTP with webhooks in order to get direct access to custom applications, like in this case, a Spring Boot application. And so really the idea is, the target systems just tune into the events that they need, and that really you can leverage any integration technology as long as you're doing the small single and purpose decentralized like microservices approach to integration. So the next step to consider is having an event mesh. And so this is again where really that event equals a noun, verb, and property comes in and completes the picture. Because ultimately, as you start streaming data, in this case, let's say you're taking data out of SAP, maybe you're publishing two different topics here. One is data related to inventory being stocked, and you can have the SKU and a store number. And maybe another piece of data that you're extracting out of SAP would be sales orders, and that, yep, they've been created. And again, some properties about the sales order itself. And again, maybe you were doing some microservices work with Spring Boot and Azure. Maybe you've got some things that you're doing within Google Cloud and how you're feeding data here to Salesforce, et cetera. And so really what the idea here is that as that data is published, these different application consumers can subscribe to exactly what they need. So maybe this application is interested in all inventory data. Maybe this storefront needs information just related to its specific store and inventory about that. Maybe this mobile device needs only sales order information for this specific user. Maybe the Salesforce application needs SAP order data to feed into it. And finally, maybe an analytics system is trying to do analytics on a certain SKU from an order perspective. All of this is possible if you think of your data as moving through as an event mesh. And again, an event mesh provides ubiquity across moving data across the enterprise. So again, regardless of the cloud, whether you're on-premise, et cetera. And it also provides the ability to consume and filter to the data to just what you need. And it's really a key to implementing micro integrations, because there's a lot of resilience that you get out of an event mesh that allows them to stay small and single in purpose, so that you're not adding a whole bunch of failure and retry logic, which I would claim isn't simple anymore, to those micro integration components. And the last piece, which certainly isn't the least important, is democratizing your data. So if you've sort of seen so far, these first two steps, and you go, well, it's great to be able to integrate with things. And yeah, event brokers have been around for decades. Really, this third one should excite you, which is, really, how do you know what events are available? How do you curate events and make them discoverable and exposable to everybody within your organization? Most organizations increasingly are looking at how do they democratize data across the organization. And we help you democratize real-time data across the organization, which actually, if you look at any of the Gartner presentations, there's the Gartner time value of data, and really data the moment it's produced is the highest of value. And so democratizing your data helps you eliminate organizational and data silos. It helps you provide real meaning and descriptions to these events so that non-technical users can understand how the data could be applied to different use cases. And from a development perspective, nobody likes opening up ServiceNow tickets and waiting an eternity for resources to be provisioned. And so really democratizing your data also has a key aspect of really making integration easy and self-service to the end users. And finally, how do you control and govern these different events, protect sensitive events, enforce best practices, and basically treat data and events like you do with your API products? Because ultimately, as I said before, event-driven data is the most valuable data that exists within the organization. And so the ability to know what that data is and reuse it is really, really key. So to put it all together and liberate your data, We've talked about how, business applications and IoT devices exist. They're increasingly predominant. There's thousands and thousands of them within the enterprise. But the problem is that really, historically, that data gets very siloed and it's very hard to get access to real-time business changes. And so remember our steps, right? The first step was add micro integrations, really, add that connectivity to liberate the data out of these different data silos, push that data into a event mesh for that dynamic distribution of data across the enterprise and filtering of the information to just what the consumers need. And finally, add an event management capability in order to democratize the data so that you can design, discover, govern, and control all of the events that exist within the enterprise. And so finally, once that is all put in place, you've now liberated data, you've exposed it across the organization. Now, as I mentioned before, AI systems, third parties, et cetera, can all have access to real-time data and ultimately transform your business into a real-time business. Thank you.